Hello, this is Sergio Marrero, and we are here with Rebel1 Live. We have our guest today, Katharine Wolf, a fellow entrepreneur. She's founder and CEO of Odetta, and also she has been a graduate of Stanford MBA program, and also at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where I met her years ago out of the Harvard Innovation Lab. So, Katharine, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So um, I remember just sharing with the audience, learning from Katharine as an entrepreneur out of the Harvard Innovation Lab. She was sending me to teaching me what Founders Dilemmas was and how to market I think some of the best learning is from other founders. So I'm glad I remember that and glad you were able to bless us today. So I know the audience will appreciate you. Shifting it over to you, can you share a little bit more about your company, Odetta?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for doing this and highlighting all of these kind of often less traditional stories. I started Odetta about 2 years ago, and I'll go into kind of like the why, but essentially we are an outsourcing platform where we get contracts mostly from US companies, mostly Silicon Valley, and we build teams and distribute work flexibly and remotely to women in developing economies.
That's great. And can you share a little bit more about what led you to start Odetta?
Yes. So for me, kind of the whole process, the hardest part, like 95% of kind of the hard, was coming up with the idea, which is why I probably waited so long. You've known me as an entrepreneur, but I've often been working on other people's ideas or kind of like joining an early team. I actually had been working at a fintech company, kind of early stage. And while I was there, I was working on a number of different ideas, mostly in banking. And a friend of mine was on the board of Upwork and shared some stats with me about women in work. And as soon as he did that, kind of a light bulb went off. And I realized that we were in a really interesting time. This was in 2018 to leverage Zoom, Slack, all of these kind of technologies to help facilitate kind of this both labor market arbitrage, but also just opportunity to access hidden talent. And my first trip was to Pakistan to interview about 150 women, which is where I decided that, when I decided that actually I had to build this company. And from there, it's just been, it's been awesome.
That's amazing. I know your background, that this hasn't been the first startup journey, and you actually started your earlier career in finance at Deutsche Bank. Can you share a little bit more about like how did you go from the first startup to now? I think that's it's great to hear about that you found the right idea, but can you share a little bit more of the zagged path that ends up being today?
It is totally zagged, and I think you have to just have faith that it's all going to connect. I certainly didn't know that I would be working in the Middle East and working in outsourcing. This is not kind of like something that I imagined doing, but my first job was a banker, and it was mostly because I didn't really know what to do, and my older brother had a job as a banker. And so my first dream was to move to Paris and work at this bank. I mean, I didn't want to work at this bank, but I didn't know how else to get to Paris. And while I was working in this bank, I became super interested in microcredit, and also super disillusioned with kind of the corporate structure of the bank, and also what I felt like that it didn't matter whether I came to work each day. Like whatever I did, like it didn't really have an impact. And so I actually was like, well, how do I build something that is going to have impact on people that I don't know? So my first venture was, it was just an idea around microcredit, and I tried to get a job in microfinance, which is just lending to people. I couldn't get a job. So I decided I would start one. And so I met someone at a conference who had started microcredit banks all over South Asia and Africa, and asked if I could go visit his operations. And from there, that kind of then, I just needed a story to kind of tell my parents that I was going to go do this thing. So I finally had a story, and I could then go quit. And then I got a one-way ticket and moved to the Philippines. And then I spent about 2.5 years in that region setting up a bank for women. And that was the first taste of what it's like to build something and have it like never exist, but you're the seed, and then leave when it's in good hands. And that, kind of, I think I've been chasing that ever since. It took me a while after that to find it again, to be honest. I wasn't really sure what it was that was special about me, like what type of problem I should be solving. I was uncomfortable with working in regions that I didn't understand and being on the ground and not speaking the language and being kind of this foreigner. I also realized that I could be doing like more harm than good without understanding the kind of the culture. And so so I had kind of a long investment in myself, where I went to business school, I went to Kennedy School. I kind of was learning mostly kind of how to build businesses that improve society. And I was working a lot in the impact investing space, in at social enterprises, and ultimately I graduated with a ton of debt, and no idea, and I wasn't really sure how to parlay my skill set into anything that mattered. And while you're in these programs, they kind of teach you that you can kind of go do anything in the world, but when you graduate, it's like, well, what can I do? I have no idea. And so I was also a bit disillusioned with the social impact space, to be honest, and kind of the social enterprise. And so I decided I was going to go work at a company that was like mission free, where the founders were ethical people, because I had worked at previous startups where kind of I had issues with founders, and I just wanted to work with good ethical people who were working on a hard problem, where I wanted venture backed companies so I could see what that was like. And I wanted the metrics to be revenue and profitability. And so I spent 5 years just learning like how to scale a company from 10 to 150 people. And I finally, after kind of year 4, got the confidence to say, maybe I could do this better.
That's amazing. I felt similar. Well, it's a what is it, a twisted path, but going to grad school, saying I'm going to start a company, coming out, the company pretty much blowing up, but being saddled with debt and saying, okay, now what I'm going to do? But you're fundamentally a different person, right? You come out,
Yeah.
you have all these you have the founder gene of start. It takes a certain type of person to go all the way to the Philippines and and introduce interview 100 women or 150 women and just start from scratch. The kind of the beauty of that. What led you? I also know a little bit about in your background, that you were on the investing side as well as the founding side. Can you share why you went into investing, or how that happened, and why did you
Yeah.
leave?
Yes. Well, I think I'm a terrible investor. So I say this. So I didn't really know what it meant to be a good investor, and I was actually just more fundamentally interested in impact investing as a field. I thought I wanted to help support the field and the ecosystem, but I wasn't necessarily someone who I felt like could see into the future. Someone who had kind of independent ideas, and I could actually like track the winners. I found myself more often looking for the underdogs and, like trying to like help everyone win. And that's not venture. I mean, venture may be underdogs, but you're looking for like the gem in the million. And so I also realized at that time, I spent a little bit of time at actually 3 VCs. One was a kind of more of like a debt company, and the other one was more of an exchange. So actually one VC but basically finance companies that were facilitating investments. And I realized I was an operator, and that I really like when it's really early. I like living in the gray. I like things that require you to kind of like context switch. I also like building something that never existed before, and kind of like it's just very thrilling to see it grow. So I'm definitely kind of in the early stage founder, where it's just like such a joy to kind of you have this vision kind of like this utopia or this type of world that you want to exist, and then you can kind of, when you start a company, you can build it. Like we've done that with Odetta in terms of the work environment we want, like how we want to treat each other, like what kind of ethics and cadence of communication, all that stuff. And so you get a lot of freedom to be able to turn something into reality.
Yeah, I love the way you shared that, is at least at the very early embryonic stage of how you work with ventures, and what that feels like. So it's definitely an addictive thing,
Yeah.
for sure. Can you share more about Odetta itself? Like who are your typical customers, and share more about what you think makes Odetta unique.
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's probably helpful to understand a little bit of the context around what makes it a viable business. So over the past 15 years, there's actually been a massive investment in education, mostly in women, all across Middle East and South Asia. And there's been kind of a return to work desire, but around 75% of the women who are getting educated are not working. And that was kind of the real insight that I realized, that there was this pool getting educated with university, master's, PhDs. And then right after that, they were starting families. And so we realized that the primary constraints were around time, so being able to work at different hours of the day, and then location, being able to work from wherever. And then also kind of being in a community where you're supported, and you're not having to go onto a platform and kind of race to the bottom and sell your soul. So that was the insight. And so we built a flexible remote work platform for the talent, so they can get tested for certain skill sets, and then work at different hours of the day. And then on the client side, we have about 90 clients. Most of them are startups, AI, data-driven companies that use us for data servicing. So our number one thing that we do is data cleaning. So we clean data, we structure data, transform it, we collect data, we build lists for companies, SDR. We do a lot of basic startup work. So any company that's like kind of 5 to 10 people, they're often sending us the type of stuff that they need to get done more affordably.
That's great. And why did you pick this type of work, the workforce that you picked? Like, can you walk through some of the decisions that led you to piece all of this together?
Yeah, the first one was like the insight around that there was this highly educated pool of talent that was not working at all. So that led me to say, okay, I'm not going after kind of like people who are impoverished or kind of like people in rural areas. Like, we're going to target countries where more women than men are getting educated, and less than 75% of them are working, because there's some sort of disconnect. And that took us to 12 countries. It was mostly in the Middle East and South Asia. But right then there, we had our target population, which is 30 million women who are not working, who are fluent in English, who are getting educated and out of the workforce. And then the first thing that we had to do was we actually had to kind of hire a few people and then figure out how to sell their services. And that was really hard. Like that, I could have spent months doing that. But we actually tested a few things, and they were way too subjective. It was actually pretty hard to sell. And so we picked data because it was often, it was kind of like largely a correct answer. And that was something that we could more easily quality control. And I also had called a number of my friends who worked at companies to try to get them to hire our team. And data just seemed like a booming place. It was, all these companies needed access to more data, and they needed it to be cleaned. There was kind of a strong desire for data science services. So that's how we got started. And then about a year ago, we didn't pivot, but we expanded into startup services.
And when you say startup services, what are some things that startups usually come to you for?
The biggest one since COVID has been SDR, so essentially sales. So we build lists for companies and help them target their prospects. Probably number 2 is manual validation. So a lot of these companies, they say they're fully automated, but they're not. They have a team of kind of trained humans who are doing things behind the screen. And so that's, we do that for a lot of companies.
Love it. And I mean, that's pretty amazing. There are 30 million women that are highly educated that aren't able to, that aren't engaged in the workforce. Why does Odetta work for them? Is it just the remote component? Why does Odetta work for
no, it's not just remote. So, I mean, essentially you can do remote right now without Odetta needing to exist. We actually designed it with a number of constraints, but the number one thing was that 9 to 5 doesn't work because of a whole number of constraints related to kind of cultural and family obligations. So we realized that you actually needed to allow people to work during different hours of the day and kind of rethink 9 to 5. So you can work, most of our team, they work in their evenings. So they're full-time moms during the day, or they're taking care of the mother-in-law, or they're doing whatever they need to do in their day. And then they work, let's say 4 to 8 hours at the hours of their choice. And so inherently also part of our use cases, what we sell is asynchronous work. So we need to be able to facilitate in our platform hundreds of people working kind of asynchronously, different time zones, different locations, without speaking to each other to deliver a project. And I think that's kind of like really the future of work, building the tooling around that, and that, kind of like allowing teams to be really efficient without having to be in the same office. And that's what we spend a lot of time thinking about.
I was like, Catherine, do we have you? It got a little jumbled,
Yeah.
But you're back. No, on the topic of the future of work, since we're there, can you share a little bit more on what are the trends you see that are, some of them are taking place now because of COVID, really speeding up our transition to a more distributed workplace. But can you talk about what are the top trends that you think are you've already been on the edge of, but that you think are going to proliferate going forward in looking at the future of work?
Yeah, sure. And I think, so COVID definitely brought us, like, whether it's 5 to 10 years in the future, I'm not sure. But more companies will definitely be remote first. I think a lot of like access to talent in general has existed. I mean, there are plenty of platforms out there that help you access talent in different regions of the world. But I think like a big part of the future of work, which I was touching on earlier, is actually facilitating kind of the coordination, organization, and like collective tooling around teams within the future of work. And then I also think one of the things that that has changed, or maybe has been like pushed into the future, is previously a lot of even kind of our startup clients, they would do everything in-house. And even though there's kind of always been this outsourcing of certain things, maybe IT, maybe engineering, whatnot, there has been a sense of like, I want to kind of keep it within for my IP. And I think one of the things that has changed is, and that will change, and it won't be immediate or overnight, but that more companies will start to specialize on what it is, their core specialization, and delegate and outsource everything else. Because of labor market arbitrage, because of automation, because a whole number of trends doesn't make it useful to have that in-house. And so we're already starting to see that with, it used to be just rote tasks that you would kind of do on platforms, like things that didn't require thinking. And then now with COVID, it's like, okay, well, I'm actually going to hire my team in kind of, a different city that's further away. So I think that shift more internationally is going to be a big one.
And that's and when you mention tools and there's this more international workforce outsourcing, but what tools and infrastructure do you think need to be built in order to help us move? I know Zoom has exploded, and in several and Google Meet, but what other things do you foresee need to be built to really enable a full transition or just a more robust transition?
Yeah, I mean, like everyone can have a perspective, because it's everything that's missing in kind of like when you're mimicking work, and now you're thinking about what's missing in work, like whether it's the community, whether it's figuring out when someone's free, like when they're productive, like being able to look across the room and see that they're deep in thought, so you're not going to interrupt them. I think Zoom and Slack and some of the organizational tools are just kind of like the basic fringe. I think that we're going to have entire kind of like virtual environments, so you can actually simulate what it's like to sit next to someone and brainstorm, and kind of like facilitating all of that virtually is what a lot of companies are currently working on.
And can you speak to the community? I know we spoke, and I know from your previous startup endeavors and from your time at the Kennedy School, impact, not only making money, but also having a positive impact is important to you. Can you talk about the impact Odetta is making for the community of women that you're employing?
Yeah, and can you still hear me?
I can. It was a little choppy. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. It is a little choppy. Yeah, so I'm definitely would classify myself as a mission-oriented founder. Odetta is, you can build any type of company, right? But Odetta to me is, our mission is to facilitate more flexible jobs all across the world. And the way that we want to do that is by building technology, but also by building like a very sustainable business that is here for the long term. And so when I think about kind of mission, it's funny because I was super focused on revenue in the beginning, just being a bootstrap company. But one of the things I try to do is figure out, like, our mission is to deliver kind of jobs, stable jobs that are remote to our pool of talent. And so we use that in all of our decision making. In other words, if we need to think about pricing, we'll figure out that from the perspective of our talent, of our workforce, what makes the most sense, while also building a business that's going to be sustainable, that's going to be a growth business, that's going to be around for a while.
Well, that's great. I just turned off the camera just to see if it'd be slightly smoother. So I'm here though.
Okay, great.
No, that's great, especially in looking at I know I had the privilege of visiting the Middle East as well, and that was one of the discussion points is how to kind of respect the culture that exists, and also enable a transition for more educated women to enter the workforce. So you're enabling that, which is great. So that's a powerful powerful impact. Can you share a little bit more? What do you think are as it what's in as you're moving forward with Odetta, what and I know we talked about this briefly before, from the real founder perspective, everybody, or not everyone, but it is common knowledge or commonly taught that you need to you need to go get venture capital, or you need to be a high growth startup coming out. And can you share a little bit more of your thoughts on the path of a founder, and the kind of the different options that you considered in launching Odetta?
Yeah, it's super important because if there's one thing kind of I want to leave today, it's that there's certain things that at least I had stuck in my brain for whatever reason that if I didn't do, we weren't a real company. And one of them was around venture. It was, if we, didn't raise capital, there was this kind of thesis that we were, going to cap out, or we were, going to be a small business or a lifestyle business. And I think that's very detrimental to a lot of founders who have great ideas, who want to start something, who want to build something. And, ultimately we decided to be a customer funded bootstrap business for a whole host of reasons. But, I met with a lot of VCs really early in the game, and I didn't feel like that model suited the type of business that I wanted to build. A lot of it came down to one, not wanting to be put on a clock right away, not knowing exactly kind of who we are, what we wanted to do. I'm also kind of I'd worked at a venture-backed company previously and saw how involved they were in a lot of the kind of fundamental decisioning. And that scared me. I felt like to bring someone into your cap table, you really have to make sure that you've got aligned incentives and that they're there to help kind of facilitate the growth of your mission. And so until I knew exactly who we were, and until I felt like I would be coming in a position of strength, I decided not to engage at all in kind of those conversations, even angel investors. And my reasoning was simple. I was a solo founder. I didn't have much time. it's incredibly distracting to be out fundraising. You're getting a lot of perspectives of kind of like, oh, this is what it looks like to be $1 billion business. And so I just decided that we were going to simply go after customer funding. So we spent all of our time, first 2 years, just getting customers and growing revenue. And now we're now in a position where we've earned the revenue of what we probably would have raised, and we're still kind of independent venture. So for us, it's worked out. Not every company can go and sell without having kind of a product. In our case, we didn't have to do that much investment to kind of build a bunch of experiments to be able to, learn and get better and get customers and build a team of 200 and kind of like keep going. So, but our model of kind of having talent in other parts of the world and really dog fooding kind of their skill set, and then whatever worked in terms of building our company, then selling it to clients was kind of like the perfect match for a bootstrapped journey.
I don't think we hear. Thank you for sharing that, because I don't think we hear enough of the bootstrap journey, and as investors, investors are touting what they want to look for, the high growth startups. But for people that are starting out on their own venture, I always say the best investor is your customers, because they're investing for your product, and they're giving you non-dilutive capital and proving things out. So that's amazing. Like building a company, employing 200 people without, with little to no initial funding. Initial venture funding. That's amazing. Can you share? I know. Can you share some of the what's been a challenge along the way? I know that the startup journey seems really smooth, and everybody, looking at it always says, "Oh, I want to be a founder tomorrow." What, if you can share one of the most challenging parts and how you made it through the journey with the audience?
Yeah, it's so challenging because I think the hardest part for me was, you have this kind of fundamental idea or vision to start, but then I felt like I had to kind of reinvent. We had to like build everything, like even from the format of what the company looked like to kind of like that the team was all going to be. We made another decision that we were going to kind of like have the team be all outside of the US for bootstrapping perspective. So for me, first of all, the hardest was getting the idea. And then I would say that the next 6 months were actually pretty smooth because we got some good traction. We kind of like just started with a few clients. I had basically a couple friends of mine just hire my team. And then all of a sudden our revenue went to zero after having kind of like really great revenue. And the reason was we didn't know how to get recurring business. And so kind of month 9, revenue going to zero, having a big team, that was really scary. And so we actually had to kind of figure out how to sell to people that I didn't know, such that it wasn't, my network. So it was something that we could replicate. But then also how to build a team that was largely variable cost, in the sense that we could kind of like turn up and down a dial, and then, turn on marketing, turn down sales, turn up ops. And so that was a need that we needed to be super nimble. At the same time, we'd hired all these people and we wanted to be able to deliver work to them, according to their schedule, and not lose them, and also not break the promise. So month 9 to 15 were really hard. We were had to figure out kind of who we were. I had, I think a good thing before starting a company is to have a bit of a personal runway. I had a small one from my last company, but it wasn't huge. And so I actually ended up getting rid of my San Francisco apartment and I spent a good while kind of like living rent free, just to be able to kind of put whatever I had back into the company so we could survive. And then, you have these moments where you're like, okay, I always knew it was a good use of my time. But I didn't know whether the business was viable. I just didn't know whether we could ever get above the certain revenue that we were hitting every month. And yeah, and then ultimately, I think you just like keep showing up. And for us, COVID was it essentially kind of tripled our business, and it was unexpected. And we kind of realized that we had a niche, and we were selling something that people needed, especially kind of in recessionary times. And that was then it took us to kind of like the next milestone. But I think the challenge is that you've got a lot of things that you're trying to optimize for, and you've got this conviction, but every single call you're like having to you need a lot of believers, and so that can get tiring. So things to do that I combated to kind of keep that alive and not burn out was I sleep 8 to 10 hours every night. I'm like, I kind of invest in like making sure that I'm healthy so I can be a good person and be a nice person on Zoom calls, and kind of like, enjoy every day, because it isn't like, the journey is also what's fun. Like, I don't want to like look up in 5 years and be like, oh great, I achieved that. It's like the journey is a big part of it, even if it's kind of the darker days.
No, and that's it shows a little bit of the realness in the background when you said you're living, rent free, and I've done this, something similar. You're trying to prop up your business, make sure it keeps going, and gracious family and friends are the ones that lend a couch, or a spare couch or some space so that you can crash it. It's the real story behind, before you make it to something more stable and that has 200 employees. So that's pretty amazing. Can you share what's next for Odetta?
Yeah, we're in a bit of a kind of expansion mode at the moment. I mean, very luckily, we were kind of stuck, I would say, before COVID, where we weren't really sure what our value proposition was. And then, kind of all of month of March, I was like, just like everyone else, just kind of reading the news, not really doing much. And then we realized actually that most of our customers were kind of doubling down and asking for more projects. And it was actually my team that was kind of like suggesting that we, start doing more sales and marketing. And I felt like we shouldn't be selling in this time, and that we should be using our workforce to help kind of solve the COVID issue. And we were actually doing a lot of that stuff too. But then we realized that actually a lot of the women on our platform had become overnight the primary earners in their families. And so that kind of like really motivated me to get back into a position of kind of just selling. And then we ended up, hitting some milestones before we thought we would. And so now we're actually in the process of doubling our team. So we're trying to get the team, and again, the team includes the workforce, to probably over 400 over the summer. And we're going to still do that in kind of the same way that we've done it before, which is customer funded, over the shelf software, process driven, using our own engineers for automation, but nothing too fancy. And I think once we hit 500 people, then we'll start to think about, we already are starting to think about, but like how can we mimic all of the stuff that we're doing, the stuff that we've learned in terms of like workflow and workflow automation and how to build teams, and put that into a platform and invest in a product such that things don't break as often, because now a lot of what we do, it's humans, and we have a lot of different people who have roles, and there's a lot of human error in that. I think it's great for learning, but at some point you kind of then just have this vision of like what something should look like, and you can kind of build that very simply and elegantly. And so that'll be our chart over this year. And the next kind of like North Star for us is being able to deliver work for 1,000 women. We're currently in 30 different countries, and that's kind of the next thing I'm thinking about. And then thereafter, we'll try to 10x that and see what we need to do in order to achieve that growth.
Love it. That's a powerful vision to employ, this global, highly educated female workforce across the world. So, thank you very much. This was Katharine for joining us. So everyone listening, this This was Katharine Wolf on Rebel One Live. She is CEO and founder of Odetta. And thanks again for listening. Please come and watch and listen every week on Tuesdays, on Thursdays, 7 p.m. Thanks again, Katharine, for joining us. And again, if you're interested in contacting, you can visit Odetta.ai, and that's where I'm sure you can find Katharine and her amazing crew. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.